So if you're looking to invest in a residential property within your super fund, this video is for you. If you'd like to understand the ins and the outs, the risks, the potential returns, then continue watching. Now, we're going to compare and contrast two scenarios. Most of us start off, or everyone starts off with a retail or an industry super fund like your AusSuper or CBAS and a whole bunch of those sorts of funds, because you just have to nominate it and your employer will put in. It used to be 10, 10.5, 11, it's now 11.5, going up to 12% off your salary every year, so that number goes up and up every year. But the thing with superannuation is it's a trust held on your behalf until you hit preservation age or retirement age. That used to be 65, it's now 67 years of age. So if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, this is still 10, 15, 25 years away before you can access any of this money. And until then, it remains within this environment, and it's a very good environment because it's a very tax-friendly environment. The maximum tax you'll ever pay within your super fund is 15%, and the minimum tax you'll pay is 0%. So much better than most people today. If you're self-employed, you're paying well over 50% in tax. So a really awesome vehicle to create wealth. Now, one thing to understand here is shares versus property. Shares are a bit more volatile because you can buy and sell them quickly. You can get in and out without the exchange costs of transacting in property. That said, property go through cycles too. So sometimes property is growing at 10, 15% per annum, like we've seen in certain states over the last 3 odd years. And we've seen across some other states where property is growing at a much slower rate. So, you're 1 to 3% per annum. So it goes through these growth cycles and these plateau cycles. Now, if you strip all of that away and you just look at the last 50 years, shares in property through those peaks and those troughs, they grow at an average compound rate of 10% per annum, which is pretty cool and not bad. Now, let's compare the scenarios I was talking about earlier. So if you stay within the retail or industry super fund, let's assume between two people, yourself and your partner, you have $200,000. That's where you could start to look at a self-managed super fund and potentially purchasing a property with a self-managed super fund. Now, if you just stayed within the retail super fund and did nothing, your $200,000 growing at, say, the 10% we talked about before is $20,000 per year. And let's make another assumption and say you had 15 years before you hit 67. So you're in your 40s. So $200,000 growing at 10% per annum is $20,000 times by 15 is obviously less than $835,000, but that's because compounding does a lot of work. So compounding in this instance has given you approximately another $300,000. So you'll end up with $835,450, and making the assumption that you don't put any more money into your super fund. Now, of course, you're going to put more money, or your employer is going to put more money into your super fund, but to keep the numbers simple, I've stripped that out of both sides of this equation, right? So taking it out of the industry super fund contributions and taking it out of the self-managed super fund contributions. So it's fair to both sides of the equation. Now, you'll end up with 835, not bad. Let's take the same money and let's say you create a self-managed super fund, which I've explained in a previous video, is simply a trust with a bank account held on your behalf in your super fund's name. Same rules apply. Now, you take your $200,000 and instead of just leaving it there in shares or whatever else it's invested in, you decide that you will purchase an investment property. So let's say you purchase a $700,000 investment property. Now, by the way, with no other debt in your names, if you've got about $200,000 in your super fund, you're in approximately $120,000 each. You'll easily qualify to purchase a property if you've got no other debts within your super fund. More on that in another video. You'll purchase this property at, say, an 80% loan to value ratio. You can get 90% in super funds nowadays. However, 80% is what a vast majority of clients, and we've done ourselves too, so we'll stick with the 80%. So this is 80%. 560 is 80% of 700, which means including stamp duty, legal fees, and sundry other costs involved in purchase of this property, you'll need to contribute $175,000 to purchase this property. The bank will lend you $560,000, and that will give you approximately 105% of that $700,000 purchase price. You'll still have $25,000 left off in your offset account, 200 minus 175. Now, there's nothing scary about investing in a super fund. It's very, very much similar to purchasing property in your personal name. It still has a bank account. The lender still lends you the same money. You still see it on your internet banking. The rent still goes into that bank account. The loan repayments still do come out of that same bank account. There are just certain restrictions and certain rules and different tax environments controlled, as I explained in the previous video, by the SIS Act. I won't get into that in this video. But what I will compare and contrast, as promised, is now instead of getting 10% on $200,000, you're getting 10% because shares in property grow the same, remember? You're getting 10% on $700,000 because your property that you bought is $700,000, which in itself is $70,000 per year versus $20,000 per year. Now what you've got to work out, and I've done the numbers for you, is growing at 10% across 15 years, that $700,000 property is going to be worth $2.924 million. Now, that's a big number compared to $835,000. However, we have some costs now that we've got this property, and we've got two options to realize some of these gains. We can either sell it or we can keep it. So if we sold it, we'll have some agent fees to pay. Let's call it 1.8% of that sale price, which is $52,000. We may have some capital gains tax, and I've worked that out to approximately $165,000. Now put an asterisk next to this because if you are in your preservation age and the rules haven't changed, then remember I mentioned earlier on the video the maximum amount of tax you can pay is 15% and the lowest you'll pay is 0. Now in preservation age, under current rules, you'll actually pay 0 CGT if you sold this when you retired at age 67, which is beautiful. No other environment in Australia, not a company, not a trust, not your personal name, nothing else offers you this sort of low tax rate. And that could be worth $165,000 just in itself. Now then you've got a loan to be repaid as well because you borrowed $560,000 and we're assuming you had an interest-only loan and you didn't pay a cent off across these 15 years. So after selling it for 2.9 and paying all your fees, you're then left with $2.147 million. You compare that net number with $835,000 and you'll see that it's about $1.3 million more in retirement, which is about 157% greater return on investment. Massive numbers. That's just on one $700,000 property. Now we've created strategies within superannuation where, because one of the rules, restrictions in super is once this property grows in value, you cannot use the equity to purchase another property like you can in your individual company names. So we've created strategies though that allow us to purchase multiple properties within super. So I'm keeping this video educational and brief and simple to understand the concept, but know that we can times this many times to purchase multiple properties across that 20-25 year time horizon, which you would do. So the second option is you can keep it. So if you kept it, you could either keep this asset in itself, so the $2.9 million property, getting you, let's just say worst case scenario, 2.5% return, or you could sell that property, like we've just done in example 1 here, and you could invest $2.147 million across a multitude of properties, thereby increasing your yield to say 4.5%, potentially even 5%. If you Airbnb'd some of those properties, even up to 9, 10, 12, 15%. But even if we just kept it really simple and said, you only made a 4% yield on that money. That's $85,000 per year in passive income with one property. And if this isn't retirement or pension phase for you, then that is tax-free income too. So this is the difference between doing nothing, like most people, forgetting about it because retirement's too far away, too complex, don't understand it, versus taking control of your finances today. It's like buying that property 20 years ago. You can't reverse time, but what you can do is learn from that and think about the next 20 years. So hopefully this video was educational. If you've got any questions, comments, if you'd like me to elaborate on any other points, then please just send me an email or a text.